I remember that day perfectly. It was a Saturday in October. The sky was crystal blue, typical of Texas hill country, without a single cloud, and a warm breeze gently swayed the bluebonnets in the fields surrounding our family ranch. I was getting ready for my cousin Emily's wedding, wearing an elegant cream-colored dress with pearl details that I'd bought specially for the occasion. My heart was full of hope, because I finally felt like I was part of the family again, after so many years of tension. You need to understand something about my family. We own one of the oldest cattle ranches in Texas hill country, a property that's belonged to the Patterson family for over 150 years. My grandfather, Robert Patterson, had transformed this property into an agricultural empire recognized throughout Texas, producing some of the finest beef cattle in the state that reached the plates of the most prestigious steakhouses in Dallas and Houston. I'd always been passionately connected to this land, to the scent of sage and cedar, to the old limestone barns that had witnessed generations of family tradition. But my father, William Patterson, never saw me as a true heir. To him, I was just a walking disappointment. Since childhood, I'd heard comments about how I should have been born a boy, how it was such a shame that the Patterson name would die with me, considering I was an only child. Every success at school, every good grade, every award I won, everything was diminished with a sigh and a look of disappointment. When I turned 18, I decided to study agricultural business at Texas A&M University. I wanted to return and help modernize the ranch, introduce new breeding techniques, improve the quality of our livestock genetics programs. But my father saw this as another way of wasting the family's money. He said women didn't understand ranching, that I should find a husband and stop dreaming about nonsense. During the 4 years of college, our relationship deteriorated. He cut my allowance several times, saying I was spending too much money, that he saw no return on investment. I had to work at local feed stores, tutor other students, do everything to support myself. But I remained strong because I knew that one day I'd return home as a qualified professional, ready to take my place on the ranch. My grandfather Robert was different. He always believed in me, always said I had Patterson blood in my veins, that I understood cattle and land better than any man he knew. During breaks when I came home, we'd spend hours talking about plans for the ranch, about how we could expand, diversify. He taught me everything about the business, from how to choose the perfect time for cattle drives to how to negotiate with buyers from the Fort Worth stockyards. When I graduated in December 2022, my grandfather was in the front row at the graduation ceremony, his eyes filled with tears of pride. My father didn't even come. He said he had obligations on the ranch, that he couldn't waste time with ceremonies. It hurt, but I was already used to his absences, his indifference. I returned to the ranch with my degree in hand, full of projects and ideas. I wanted to implement a program for improving our cattle breeds, invest in modern technology for feed management, expand into sustainable ranching practices. But my father received me coldly, saying the ranch already functioned perfectly as it was, that it didn't need changes. That's when the daily arguments began. He questioned every suggestion I made, discredited my education, said college theory was useless in real life. When I tried to show studies, data, scientific evidence, he'd simply walk away, muttering that women were too stubborn for their own good. The final straw came in January 2023. I'd identified a problem in our herd. Some cattle were developing respiratory issues, and I suggested bringing in a veterinary specialist to treat the condition. My father exploded, saying I was inventing problems where none existed, that I wanted to spend money unnecessarily to show off. He yelled at me in front of the ranch hands, called me a pretentious little know-it-all, saying I was nothing but a spoiled girl who understood nothing about life. That day, I left the ranch with a suitcase in hand and a broken heart. I rented a small apartment in Austin and began working as a livestock consultant for a regional agricultural cooperative. It was humiliating to receive a salary of $30,000 after living my entire life in such comfort, but I needed to prove to myself that I could live independently. My grandfather was devastated by my departure. He called every day, begged me to return, said he would talk to my father, but I was tired of being treated as a second-class citizen in my own home. I told him I would only return when I was respected as a professional and as a daughter. During this period, my grandfather began falling ill. First, there were small signs, forgetfulness, confusion with dates. Then came the diagnosis no one wanted to hear: Alzheimer's disease. Within months, this strong and sharp man I so admired began losing himself. I visited him whenever I could, but my father made these meetings difficult. He said I only came to disturb a sick man, that it was better if I stayed away. But my grandfather was always happy to see me, even on days when he couldn't remember my name. He'd grip my hand tightly and say I was special, that I must never abandon my dreams. In September 2023, my grandfather had an unexpected improvement. He had a few days of complete clarity, as if the fog in his mind had momentarily lifted. That's when he called me for a private conversation. We sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset over the rolling hills. He told me he knew he didn't have much time left, that the disease was progressing rapidly. He spoke about how guilty he felt for not intervening more in the relationship between my father and me, how he should have been firmer in defending me. He apologized for the times he remained silent when he should have spoken, for the missed opportunities to reconcile us. But what he said next changed everything. With eyes gleaming with determination, my grandfather told me he'd made a decision months earlier when he was still completely lucid. He'd consulted a lawyer and modified his will. The ranch, which had always been considered the inheritance of the eldest son, was now entirely registered in my name. I was shocked. I asked if he was certain, if he didn't want to reconsider, if he didn't think this would cause even more problems in the family. But my grandfather was resolute. He said I was the only person who truly understood the value of this land, who had a vision for the future, who knew how to preserve the family legacy. He said my father was stuck in the past, that he would never accept the changes necessary to keep the ranch competitive. He gave me a copy of the documents, kept in a sealed envelope, and made me promise to open it only after his death. He said he wanted me to live my life, build my career, only return to manage the ranch when I was truly prepared for the challenges ahead. Those were my grandfather's last moments of clarity. In the weeks that followed, he was lost again in the fog of Alzheimer's, and I knew our farewell had been final. I kept the envelope like a treasure, but I confess that sometimes I doubted whether it was real or just the ravings of a sick man. In November, my grandfather died in his sleep, peacefully, as he'd always said he wanted. The funeral was enormous. People from across the county came to bid farewell to the patriarch of the Patterson family. I was there, naturally, dressed in black, mourning the loss of the only person who had always believed in me. But my father didn't miss the opportunity to humiliate me even in that moment of grief. During the wake, he made sure to speak loudly enough for everyone to hear that he was now the sole person responsible for the ranch, that he could finally run the business as a real man should. He looked at me with contempt and said he hoped I now understood what my place in the family was. After the funeral, I returned to my life in the city, working at the cooperative, trying to rebuild my self-esteem. But I always carried that sealed envelope with me, like a talisman that gave me strength in the most difficult moments. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hold it against my chest and whisper a prayer, praying that the contents were true. March 2024 arrived with the invitation to my cousin Emily's wedding. She'd always been close to me, one of the few people in the family who didn't judge me for my choices. The wedding was to take place on the ranch itself, a grand ceremony with over 500 guests. Emily called me personally to invite me, saying it wouldn't be the same without me there. I hesitated greatly about accepting the invitation. I knew it would be difficult to be there, seeing my father commanding everything as if he were the absolute owner of that place. But Emily insisted, said she needed my support on the most important day of her life. How could I refuse that to someone who had always been like a sister to me? I bought an elegant cream-colored dress in silk with pearl details from Dallas, which complemented my blonde hair perfectly. I had my hair styled, my nails done, perfumed myself with my grandfather's favorite cologne. I wanted to look beautiful, show everyone I was doing well, that I'd overcome adversity. On the wedding day, I arrived at the ranch with my heart heavy. Seeing that land, those endless pastures, the ranch house where I'd grown up, all of it brought an avalanche of memories and emotions. For a few moments, I managed to forget all the problems and simply appreciate the beauty of the place I'd always considered my home. The decoration was magnificent. White roses and blue bonnets everywhere, chairs organized in perfect rows in the ranch's garden, an improvised altar beneath a centuries-old live oak where my grandfather used to rest on hot afternoons. The sky was perfectly blue. The wind carried the sweet scent of flowers mixed with the familiar aroma of grass and cattle. I greeted some relatives, chatted with cousins I hadn't seen for months, received warm embraces from uncles and aunts who'd always treated me with affection. For some moments, I felt I truly belonged to that place, that I was part of this large, boisterous family gathering to celebrate love. Emily was radiant in her wedding dress, a classic model in French lace that had belonged to our great-grandmother. She hugged me tightly, said she was happy I'd come, that my presence made the day even more special. We chatted for a few minutes about the ceremony, about natural nervousness, about plans for the honeymoon. My father circulated among the guests like a gracious host, greeting important people, conducting business even on a day of celebration. He wore his finest black suit, the same one he'd worn for special occasions since I could remember. He was clearly in his element, loving being the center of attention, the family patriarch whom everyone respected and admired. When he saw me, his expression changed immediately. The smile disappeared, his eyes narrowed, and I could see that my presence disturbed him deeply. But we were in public, at a family celebration, so he limited himself to a cold nod and continued his performance as the perfect host. The ceremony was beautiful. The minister spoke of love, union, family, tradition. Emily and her fiancé exchanged moving vows, promising eternal love beneath that oak that had witnessed so many important moments in our family's history. I wept with emotion, happy for my cousin, but also with a heavy heart thinking of my grandfather, who would have been so proud to see this celebration on his land. After the ceremony, everyone moved to the improvised tent in the ranch's main courtyard. The tables were beautifully decorated, the food was abundant and delicious, the live country band entertained the guests. It was exactly the type of celebration our family knew how to throw. Warm, abundant, full of joy and tradition. I was chatting with some cousins about my life in the city, telling them about my work at the cooperative, when I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. It was my father, his face flushed and his breath reeking of bourbon. He'd had more to drink than he should have, which made his already explosive temperament even more dangerous. Without saying a word, he grabbed my arm, dragging me to the center of the tent where everyone could see. The band stopped playing, conversation ceased, all eyes turned to us. I felt my stomach lurch, sensing that something terrible was about to happen. In a loud, clear voice, so everyone could hear, my father began his speech of humiliation. He said he'd tolerated my presence until then, out of respect for Emily's special day, but that he could no longer pretend to be proud of me as a daughter. He spoke about how I'd abandoned the family, how I'd thrown away all the opportunities given to me, how I'd chosen to live a mediocre life in the city instead of accepting my role on the ranch. The words poured from his mouth like poison, each phrase designed to wound me in the depths of my soul. He said I was a disappointment, that I didn't deserve to carry the Patterson name, that I'd dishonored my grandfather's memory with my rebellion and ingratitude. He said I was nothing but a spoiled girl who would never understand the true value of work and tradition. There I stood, in the middle of 500 people, feeling every gaze like a knife thrust. Some people lowered their eyes, embarrassed by the situation. Others watched with morbid curiosity, like someone watching a car wreck. Emily tried to intervene, asking him to stop, but my father was beside himself, determined to destroy me publicly. The climax came when he pointed his finger at me and shouted for all to hear that I was no longer welcome in that house, on that land, in that family. He said I should leave immediately and never return, that he didn't want to see my face in that place he'd built with so much sacrifice. He said I was a disgrace to the Patterson name, and it would be better for everyone if I simply disappeared forever. Tears streamed down my face like a waterfall. I couldn't speak, couldn't defend myself, couldn't do anything but stand there, being humiliated in front of all my family and friends. I wanted to run, to hide, to disappear forever from that place I'd once considered my home. Emily came running to me, hugged me tightly, whispered comforting words in my ear. Some cousins also approached, trying to minimize the embarrassment, offering silent support, but the damage was done. Everyone there had witnessed my complete humiliation, my definitive expulsion from the family. With what little dignity remained to me, I wiped the tears from my face, lifted my head, and walked towards the exit. Every step was torture. Every second there seemed an eternity. I felt gazes following me, heard murmurs beginning as soon as I passed, imagined the conversations that would arise from this shameful episode. I left the ranch driving along country roads, with tears blurring my vision. I stopped the truck several times to cry, to release all that pain suffocating my chest. I felt as if my heart had been torn out, as if a part of me had died in that moment of public humiliation. For weeks after the wedding, I lived in deep depression. I couldn't work properly, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I constantly relived the scene, wondering if there was something I could have done differently, if I truly deserved that treatment. I questioned all my choices, all my dreams, my entire identity. That's when I remembered the envelope my grandfather had given me. That dark and lonely night, with rain beating against my apartment's window, I finally opened the seal I'd kept for so many months. Inside was a handwritten letter and several official documents. The letter was a declaration of love and hope. My grandfather said he knew I would go through difficult times, that my father would never be able to see my true value. But he asked me not to give up, to continue believing in myself, to honor the family legacy in the way I thought best. The documents were even more surprising. There was the deed to the ranch, entirely registered in my name since before my grandfather's death. There was also a testamentary letter explaining his reasons, registered with the lawyer with 2 witnesses. Everything legal, everything valid, everything irrevocable. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. That land, that ranch house, those herds, everything belonged to me legally. My father, who boasted so much about being the family patriarch, was in reality nothing more than a temporary administrator of property that no longer belonged to him. In the following days, I consulted a lawyer specializing in property law to confirm the validity of the documents. He analyzed everything meticulously and confirmed that the transfer had been carried out in an absolutely legal manner. My grandfather had been very smart, taking care of every detail, anticipating possible challenges. But I didn't want to create a scandal immediately. I needed time to process this information, to decide how to act. For months, I continued working at the cooperative, keeping my true situation secret. Only the lawyer knew the truth, and I'd requested absolute secrecy until I decided the right moment to reveal everything. The right moment came in December 2024, almost a year after that humiliating wedding. My father had organized a large family gathering to celebrate what he called the ranch's most prosperous year. He'd invited relatives, business partners, local dignitaries. He wanted to show everyone how well he was managing the property since the patriarch's death. I received the invitation by chance through a cousin who didn't know about our feud. When I saw the date and location, I knew immediately that this would be my opportunity for justice. I called my lawyer and asked him to prepare all the documents. I was going to end this charade once and for all. I arrived at the gathering wearing an elegant black pantsuit, my hair pulled back in an impeccable chignon, a leather briefcase in my hand. I wanted to appear professional, serious, someone who deserved respect. People looked at me with curiosity, surprised by my presence after such a long absence. My father was at the center of the room, holding forth about the previous year's profits, expansion plans, how he intended to modernize the ranch while maintaining family traditions. He spoke with authority, like someone who truly understood the business, who had the right to make important decisions. When he saw me, he stopped speaking for a few seconds, clearly disturbed by my unexpected presence. But he quickly regained his composure and continued his speech, completely ignoring my arrival. It was as if I were invisible, an unimportant person who didn't even merit a greeting. I waited patiently until he finished his presentation. When the applause died down and he asked if anyone had questions, I slowly stood and requested to speak. My father tried to ignore me, but other people began pointing at me, so he had no choice but to give me attention. In a calm, firm voice, I began explaining that there was a very important legal matter to clarify. I said that everyone there deserved to know the truth about the ranch's real legal situation. My father laughed nervously, said I'd always had a tendency to create drama, that I was probably inventing some story to attract attention. That's when I opened my briefcase and withdrew the documents. One by one, I explained what they meant: the deed of gift inter vivos, the registered will, the updated certificates. I said that legally, I had been the sole owner of this land since September 2023. The silence in the room was deafening. My father went white as a sheet, mouth agape, unable to articulate a word. Some people whispered amongst themselves. Others took out their phones to photograph the documents I was showing. The revelation was like a bomb exploding in the middle of that celebration. My father tried to object, shouted that it was impossible, that my grandfather would never have done such a thing. But when I took the handwritten letter and began reading aloud, his words lost all their force. There was my grandfather's complete justification, explaining why he'd made that decision, why he trusted me to continue the family legacy. The transformation in people's behavior was immediate. Those who minutes before had looked at me with disdain now approached with forced smiles, wanting to greet the new lady of the ranch. People who hadn't even spoken to me for years now made a point of complimenting my appearance, my professionalism, my courage to take on such responsibility. My father still tried to argue that the documents might be forged, that I could have falsified everything. But the lawyer who was with me presented the original certificates with all the necessary seals and signatures. There was no way to contest the authenticity of those papers. That's when I announced my decision. I said that as the new legal owner of the ranch, I would give 30 days' notice for all current occupants to vacate the ranch house. I explained that I intended to personally assume administration of the property, implement the changes I considered necessary to modernize the operation. The people who had previously laughed at my humiliation at the wedding now looked at me with a mixture of respect and fear. They knew I had all the legal power to make whatever decisions I wanted, and that their future relationships with me would depend on how they treated me from now on. My father left that gathering completely destroyed. The man who had boasted of being the family patriarch discovered in front of everyone he admired that he was nothing but an intruder on land that didn't belong to him. The humiliation he had caused me at the wedding returned to him amplified, final, irreversible. In the days that followed, the entire county was talking about the upheaval at the Patterson Ranch. People who had previously seen me as a rebellious and problematic daughter now saw me as an intelligent and determined heiress. My reputation changed overnight, as did the treatment I received from everyone around me. I assumed administration of the ranch in January 2025, exactly 2 years after being expelled from there as an intruder. I implemented all the changes I'd planned during my years of study: genetic improvement of the cattle breeds, modern technology for feed management, diversification of production with sustainable ranching practices, and organic beef programs. The results were impressive. In just 6 months, productivity increased by 30%, costs decreased significantly, and product quality improved so much that we secured contracts with high-end restaurants in Dallas and Houston that paid premium prices for our beef. My father tried to approach me several times, asking for forgiveness, pleading to return to work on the ranch. But I had learned to have boundaries, to value my own dignity. I offered him employment as an ordinary ranch hand, with fair wages but no decision-making power. He refused, finding it too humiliating for someone who considered himself the family patriarch. Today, 3 years after that wedding that marked my expulsion from the family, I'm respected as one of the most innovative ranchers in the region. My ranch is visited by agricultural students, researchers, other ranchers who want to learn from our techniques. The Patterson name has regained the prestige it had lost during the final years of my father's conservative administration. Emily and I have completely reconciled. She always felt guilty about what happened at her wedding, even though I explained there was nothing she could have done to prevent it. Today, she works with me on the ranch, handling the administrative side, while her husband has taken responsibility for sales contracts. Some people still ask me if I feel any remorse for taking the ranch from my father, if I don't think I was too cruel to him. My answer is always the same. He had decades of opportunities to treat me with respect, to recognize my worth, to build a healthy relationship between us. He chose the path of humiliation and contempt, and now he must live with the consequences of his choices. My grandfather always said that land belongs to no one, that we are merely temporary stewards of a legacy that must be preserved for future generations. Today, looking out over the rolling hills that stretch as far as the eye can see, at the healthy herds grazing peacefully in the pastures, at the ranch house that has once again become a home full of love and respect, I know I am honoring his trust. The ranch has never been more prosperous, has never produced so much, has never had such a solid reputation in the market. And all this happened because it finally came into the hands of someone who truly understands its value, who respects its history, who has a vision for its future. Sometimes, when the sun is setting and I'm sitting on the ranch house porch, in the same place where my grandfather had told me of his decision, I feel his presence beside me. I know he's proud of me, satisfied with the choice he made, happy to see that his trust was well placed. My family's story is a lesson about how pride can blind people to what truly matters. My father lost everything because he couldn't see the worth of his own daughter, because he preferred to follow antiquated prejudices instead of embracing the future. Now he lives a simple life in a small apartment in Austin, working as a consultant for other ranchers, always having to explain how he lost the property he considered rightfully his. I, on the other hand, have found my place in the world, not only as owner of one of the largest ranches in the region, but as a woman who proved that competence has no gender, that respect isn't inherited but earned, that sometimes justice is delayed but always comes to those who persist in doing what's right. The Patterson name will continue strong for many generations, but now carried by someone who truly understands its weight, its responsibility, its power to transform lives and communities. And it all began with a wise grandfather who could see beyond the prejudices of his time, who had the courage to break unjust traditions to ensure his legacy reached the right hands. This is my story, the story of how a public humiliation transformed into the greatest victory of my life, a story that proves that no matter how dark the storm, there's always a rainbow waiting on the other side for those who have the courage to keep walking.